NATO is vowing to do what is necessary to defend all allies. That's after reports that Iran is weighing possible attacks on US military targets in Europe if President Trump escalates the war. At the same time, efforts to end the nearly 6-month conflict appear to be at an impasse. President Trump says there are no talks underway and nothing scheduled. Iran's top negotiator, meanwhile, accuses the US of squeezing Tehran for concessions that he says were never part of the initial agreement. All of this comes as the fight over the Strait of Hormuz remains the biggest obstacle to ending the war. Iran says the critical waterway will stay closed until the US meets certain conditions.
And let me make it clear, until America implements its commitments under the Memorandum of Understanding, including lifting the blockade on the release of frozen assets, lifting the oil sanctions, ending threats and military operations on all fronts, and other conditions that America has agreed to under the understanding, the strait will not be reopened.
But new shipping data suggests Iran may be losing some of its control over the strait, with more than 80% of traffic using an alternate route maintained by Oman in recent weeks.
The White House is signaling it's shifting away from military strikes on Iran to a long-term, maybe, policy of economic strangulation. Iran's parliamentary speaker says the Strait of Hormuz will not reopen until the U.S. meets key conditions, including ending the naval blockade. Let's get right to CNN business senior reporter, CNN senior business reporter, sure. CNN senior reporter of business, David Goldman. What do you got?
Well, listen, not a marriage proposal yet, but there is some really interesting stuff that's happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now. The thing that we've been talking about for a long time is that Iran controls the strait, and we're trying in the United States to gain more control. It seems that there's been a little bit of a turning point over the last few weeks. The thing that we are looking at right now is the 80% of traffic that's going along this Omani route or is dark, right? We don't know what it is. We don't know if it's going in or out. We can't see it because they turn their transponders off. This is really important because Iran had been for a long time controlling this route that's right along the Iranian coast. They said that we want a toll or you need to register with us. What we found, though, is that over the last 2 weeks, an increasing amount of traffic is going around the Omani route. And this means that even though Iran says we are going to bombard these ships, which they have dozens of ships with attacks, they're still willing to take the risk on that green route. And the reason is because the United States military is there and they're letting ships shuttle in and out. This is key for a few important reasons. There were 20 million barrels of oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz before the war started, and around 100 ships. Not totally close to that yet, but depending on who you ask, there are a lot more tankers that are getting out of the Strait of Hormuz. The official number from the data trackers is around 4 million barrels, plus around 7 million that's being rerouted, around 11. The U.S. government says we have eyes on it, and there's actually 9 million barrels per day coming out of the strait. Defies logic, right? But actually, if you look at what's going on with that's the 16 million, but if you look at what's going on in the strait, if this route is the one that's protected and ships are actually able to come out through that route, then now we're starting to see a little bit more oil come out. That's really important for leverage.
It is worth watching. I will say the oil markets, with the prices still creeping up ever so slightly, they don't seem convinced that it's wide open.
Well, here's the thing. So the oil market wants peace. They want peace more than anything that's achievable right now. What we're seeing, though, is that oil might be coming out, but a resolution, that seems farther away.
That's an important distinction. Thank you for making it. David Goldman, thank you very much. Sarah?
All right, thank you. Minutes ago, we learned the United Arab Emirates said it is suspending all trade with Iran in light of regional escalations. Joining me now, CNN Global Affairs analyst Kim Dozier. This move by the UAE that we're just hearing about the last few minutes fits right into President Trump's changing tactics to what they said was strangle Iran economically instead of bombarding it militarily. Is this strategy going to be effective, you think?
It could definitely put enough pressure on Iran that Iran comes back to the negotiating table in some more public manner instead of the backroom sort of conversations that have been happening between various officials and interlocutors to the U.S. But the question is, can President Trump maintain that strategic patience? Because it gets boring just waiting for sanctions to bite. It took weeks, months last time for Iran to get to the stage where it had so much oil pumped out of the ground but couldn't get it to market that it was running out of storage facilities. Now, that's the kind of pressure that has to build that convinces the IRGC to allow the political leaders to make some sacrifices at the negotiating table. Can President Trump maintain message discipline and withhold some sort of response while this happens? I'm not sure.
That is the big question, I think, is how long this strategy will actually last and how difficult it will be to sustain when you consider what we're seeing in the markets now. It is costing the U.S. and the world economy as well, where we're seeing prices spike up there. I do want to talk about what we heard from David just now, that the Strait of Hormuz seems to be letting out more oil than initially thought. And, you know, Trump is saying, look, it's completely open. There is obviously a lot of pushback against that. But you are seeing more oil come out. How much control does the U.S. have here at this point?
It's still a really dicey path for shipping to go through, and they have to make that calculation. Is it worth the risk? It's also expensive to protect the Omani route. We've seen all the reporting out of what's happening with the USS Lincoln, though that ship is about to be relieved with a new vessel. But it costs a lot of money to keep those patrols going in perpetuity, though perhaps what President Trump wants to do is just keep this going through the midterms so he doesn't have an active war and he can tell his constituents that he has contained Iran and is protecting trade. Will the markets believe it and some of those oil prices start coming back down? That is the question that might determine what people decide when they go to the polls.
Can you just give me a sense, Kim, of this switch out of the USS Abraham Lincoln, where the president called it fake news that families and the sailors on that ship were complaining about how bad the conditions had been for them over time? Give us some sense of what that means to the region, but also elsewhere, because the ship is leaving from somewhere.
Yeah, well, multiple families have spoken publicly about what their sailors are going through on the ship. So, we know that there's stress aboard that vessel, but it's going to be a pretty quick, smooth operation. But then the next ships will still have the same problem, getting supplied during this long and dangerous patrol that doesn't look like it has any end in sight.
Kim Dozier, it is a pleasure to talk us through these complicated issues going on there with the Strait of Hormuz, Iran, and the regional allies of the United States. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.